Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Elliot, Lawry.
I'm Emma Gillespie.
When we talk about cults, we tend to picture the classic images. A doomsday group in the desert, or a fringe religious sect that feels totally disconnected from everyday life. But here in Australia, cults are a current and pressing issue in our communities. So much so that the Victorian Parliament has now launched an inquiry into cults and other coercive groups. In today's podcast, you're going to hear from Clare Heath-McIvor. She established an advocacy organisation called the Survivors of Coercive Cults and High Control Groups after she left behind the life she was born into, a high control group in eastern Victoria.
Elliot, this is such a fascinating topic to be talking about today, and I think you really nailed it with your intro when you said that cults can feel like this kind of really far away concept or the stuff of true crime podcasts and docos, but it is a very real issue currently being discussed in Victoria, and Clare is one of many former cult members who are now working with the Victorian government as it tries to understand more about these groups. Before we jump into her story, can you tell us a little bit more about this parliamentary inquiry?
Yeah, for sure. So earlier this year, the Victorian government announced that they'd be holding their own inquiry into cults and high control groups. It's important to note that those terms are kind of used interchangeably because cults have a very intense stigma attached to them. So they try to word it a little bit differently sometimes, but we will hear throughout the podcast those two terms kind of used in the same way. But basically, an inquiry gives the public an opportunity to have input into issues that are before Parliament. This particular inquiry has already heard from several survivors, as well as advocacy groups, trauma experts, and religious groups.
Okay, and why is it happening right now? Why has the government in Victoria decided that now's the time?
Look, there's a lot of problems that they're trying to solve here. One of the main ones is that we don't have a legal definition here in Australia for what a cult is.
Okay.
On top of that, they're also trying to fill in the gaps that are in existing legislation to help better crack down on cult activity in the state. But the reason that they're holding the inquiry right now is off the back of a massive surge in reports of high control groups operating across the state. One of the more high-profile cases that helped trigger the inquiry came from the Geelong Revival Centre, which is a Pentecostal doomsday church based just outside of Melbourne. We've also seen a lot of cases of young people being targeted by cults. The inquiry has actually heard that universities and shopping centres have become hunting grounds for these sorts of recruiters for these cults. And this month, we've actually seen leaders from the state's universities appear before the inquiry to try and help the government put together a response.
Yeah, the way that this has impacted young people, the university recruitment stuff that has emerged is super fascinating. That gives us a bit of a picture of the inquiry itself, but today we're going to hear from Clare. Can you tell us a little bit more about her?
Yeah, so Clare was born and raised in the City Builders Church, which is also in Victoria. Her father is actually a pastor in the church, and Clare has been ostracised from her entire family and also her former community for almost a decade now. She told me about how hard it's been to adapt to a new life on the outside, as well as some stories from her experience that, while shocking, are actually pretty commonplace amongst cult survivors. You'll hear more from her in just a second, but I do want to preface this interview with just a quick content warning because we do discuss various forms of abuse throughout the chat. If you're not feeling up to it, then maybe come back for tomorrow's deep dive. But without further ado, Clare, welcome to the Daily Aus.
It's my pleasure.
So I want to start off really broad today. We're talking about cults. For anyone that's maybe not exactly sure, what is a cult?
A cult can be any group, essentially, any group that has these combination of characteristics. Usually a cult has a central charismatic leader, usually a bit narcissistic, who commands a lot of obedience and a lot of, adoration and adulation. A cult usually has a transcendent belief system, so the one kind of higher truth or the one path to enlightenment. They also have systems of influence by which people are indoctrinated and brought into the group. Often these are quite deceptive from the outset and get more serious as you come into the group. And they have systems of control once you're in. That definition is from Dr. Janja Lalich, who's an absolute queen when it comes to cult research. A lot of people think that cults are just religious or pseudo-religious. We think of sort of white doomsday cults, but it's just not the case. cults can be any type of group. There's yoga cults, there's Buddhist cults, hard labor cults, there's, multi-level marketing cults even. It can be all sorts of groups.
And you yourself are a survivor of a cult. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, sure. My group, it's still uncomfortable to call it a cult. It definitely fits the definition, but it's a Christian church that exists further out on the fundamentalist edge. We're a dominionist group, so we believed that God had sent us to take dominion of the 7 domains of society. It's a common evangelical doctrine, but the control and influence methodology within that group is what makes it quite a standout in that area. We were very, very interested in politics and had concentrated efforts to infiltrate particularly the National Party and the Liberal Party in Victoria. We also quite well known for our attitudes towards LGBT people. My ex-husband is a gay conversion therapy survivor, and even though gay conversion therapy is outlawed, in a lot of places, it's broader than just therapy. It's actually gay conversion practices, sexual orientation or gender identity change efforts that can be anything from prayer and exorcism to homophobia from behind the pulpit to all sorts of things. And we were in an arranged marriage. Some of these ideas are quite deeply held within these groups. So, so that was our group, still very involved in politics. And my parents actually run that group, and I am sadly estranged from them and my 4 siblings.
At what point in your experience did you start to sort of have questions or thoughts about the fact that you may be in a cult? What was the moment that sort of made you realize?
So there had been moments over the years, probably from when I was around 16, that I was visited by that discomfort, especially when it came to abuse that I suffered or that other people suffered, and the way that was handled, that made me feel really, really uncomfortable. I was aware that people in the community felt it was a cult, which was also deeply uncomfortable. But it wasn't until the 11th of November 2015 when I found out I was pregnant with our first child, but it's actually our 5th pregnancy, that my husband had a fight with my dad, and thus began the process of our shunning. And it's a deeply painful memory, but also I just don't think that that I would have been able to carry that pregnancy to term if I had have been in that high stress environment. Shunning isn't fun, but at least I knew I wasn't bringing a child into that world.
And we're talking today because the Victorian Parliament has launched an inquiry into cults.
Yes.
Why do you think they've launched it now?
Oh, that is a loaded question. I mean, I can only assume. To me, I've had my hearing in front of the inquiry, and I've found the committee to be really deeply invested in this, and that seems to not be a partisan thing. It seems to be right across the board, Labor, Liberal, Nationals, for which I'm deeply thankful. A couple of years ago, one of the goats of Australian journalism, Richard Baker, started working with survivors of the Geelong Revival Centre, and he started working with them on a podcast series called Secrets We Keep, Pray Harder. But it actually got benched for a few years because some members of the Geelong Revival Centre leadership were actually up on charges related to child SA. So that had to wait. And then when it was launched, Ryan and Catherine Carey, who fronted that, who led the charge on that podcast, they were working with Chris Cousins, who is an MP out in that area. And Chris really just deeply cared about this, so helped them get an inquiry up. And the data that's come out is so compelling in terms of like 95.9% of respondents on the survey said that they'd suffered psychological harm. Something like 85% said limitations on personal freedom, and 52.4% said physical or, SA abuse.
You mentioned a survey conducted by the Parliamentary Inquiry, which revealed some trends about cult survivors and their experiences there. One of the more interesting ones that I was looking at was how people are recruited into cults. Can you maybe talk us through what are some of the more common practices?
This is really interesting because it seems to be the same right across the board. I think a lot of people think, there's kids that are born into cults and it's child abuse is rife and we need to absolutely take that seriously. But there's this thought that, whatever consenting adults do in a cult is up to them. Well, the thing is, nobody consents to join a cult. You don't rock up and somebody hands you a flyer and says, hey, welcome to this cult. We're going to control every aspect of your life. It's just not how it happens. What will happen instead is you'll be invited to, a social gathering. You might be befriended by one or two extras. They might start to love bomb you, which is intoxicating. But you'll be invited to then do courses. And it might seem really innocuous. It might be a course about, authentic manhood or masculinity. And the manosphere is a huge concern with regard to that. It might be a course about, women's empowerment or politics or philosophy. It might be about recovery from abuse. And then you start sharing your more intimate secrets with this mentor. And then all of a sudden there's emotional buy-in. And then the energy that you'll be putting into the group through volunteer work or more courses or stuff like that, it starts to increase as your connection to your friends and families decrease. And then you'll have a moment where it might be like, your friends and your family don't really understand. We're your real family. We're your real friends. This is the one truth. Hey, why don't you invest in this opportunity or invest in this course or invest in whatever? Nobody consents to join a cult. They consent to go to a barbecue or go to a fun group or go to a personal development course. And it's like boiling that frog degree by degree. And it's not until the water's boiling and it's too late to escape easily that people usually realize they're in a cult.
And there's a bit of a running joke, for lack of a better term, about this one area in Melbourne CBD, Melbourne Central, or Emporium, where people say, if someone comes up to you and is being nice to you, run away because they're likely recruiting you into a cult. Yes, why do you think that's taking place there? And is there a certain target that these cults are going after?
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
Yeah. I do know that the Shincheonji cult, which is particularly insidious, is recruiting on university campuses a lot. You often see street preachers down at the Burke Street Mall and intersections like that. As for why they target certain locations, it may be demographic related. Essentially, cults are looking for people who are in the crosshairs of big transitions in life, whether that is adolescence, where the apron strings are loosening, you're more interested in your friend group, you're trying to find your place in the world, you might want to find your tribe, find your meaning, your purpose. There's also during that, late high school and early university, you're idealistic and you might be going through your first big breakup or something like that. There's other risk factors that they look for. It might be the diagnosis of an illness or the death of a family member, divorce of parents, your own divorce, moving house. These periods of transition, these periods of loneliness are ideal times for cults to come in and be your meaning in life, to come in and be your tribe or come in and replace the family or close relationships that you've lost. So, yeah, that would be my theory, my hypothesis of why they'd be targeting a certain age group and in the city.
And for those people that do fall victim to these recruiting practices, can you talk us through what it's like once you're inside a cult?
I don't like using the term mind control or brainwashing, but there's, that's there, that pressure to conform to the group, that pressure to learn their language, their ways of thinking, and to represent that in the community. By the time I was about 15, I was getting up early in the morning to do my homeschooling. I was then helping school my younger brothers and sisters. I was then doing house chores, babysitting. I was then going to McDonald's, my mission field, to work my shifts. And then I was usually at church doing various different things, sort of 5-6 afternoons or evenings per week. And that fifth or sixth evening would be spent reaching out to people. Later on, I was running businesses and youth discipleship programs, and I was fairly typical of the level of volunteerism that was required there. And, if you asked me, I would have said I was happy, but I've been on antidepressants since I was 19, and I have PTSD like many people who have escaped cults. But we hide those in cults, and consequently, when we exit, a lot of us end up with autoimmune disorders because our body is just so pathologically tired. A lot of us end up with these significant, chronic illnesses. But that's a consequence of just having to go, and constantly represent and constantly be happy and joyful and peaceful while squashing all the rest down. Gender roles are usually, that's another thing that we're seeing is really common across the board. Disempowerment of women is huge, and so too is conformity to gender or sexuality norms. So unfortunately, we still do believe that change and suppression practices, which is the proper name for sort of your gay conversion stuff, still occurs in a lot of groups.
You mentioned there some, really concerning details around psychological manipulation, forced labor, sexual assault. For people who are listening, they might be thinking, if you're experiencing all those terrible things, why wouldn't you just leave? Why wouldn't you get out? What would you say to that?
It's the same as asking a person in an intimate partner violence situation, why don't you just leave? For some people, it's not just somewhere they go once a week for a course. It is their social circle. It may be their marriage. It may be their children. It may be their family members. It may have replaced their family members. They may have their employment, housing, or, support system in that group. That group may possess a whole lot of their personal information. It's common for persecution complex or an us versus them complex to be really built into that group as one of the, control or influence strategies. We're often terrified of the outside world and often hard to know where to start. I've had people tell me of having absolute meltdowns over how to open a bank account, how to get their birth certificate or passport, what to pack in an escape, who to call to escape. Can you trust that person? So there's a lot of levels here, and you can't just sort of call a hotline or Google something and go, great, now I'm exiting. Like, it's a really, it's a tricky process. For me, it was, but maybe I can fix this. Maybe I can just show them what's wrong, just show them the problems here, and maybe we can fix this. There is this, you still love them. And I still love them. And there's this double bind every time I speak out, because I'm speaking about my mum and my dad and my sisters and my brother. And I know that every time I speak, they're cringing and they're going, what? Like, they'd be at home going, why won't you stop attacking us? Why won't you shut up? And I'm here going, I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to stop people from suffering the same damage that people in cults everywhere suffer, and it's really, really tough. So we should never, ever look at somebody who's in a cult or trying and failing to escape, or trying to escape and succeeding and struggling to integrate into the world. We should never look at them and go, why didn't you do this earlier? I was terrified. I was so terrified and couldn't imagine the world a different way. It was my family. It was everyone I'd ever trusted. And years on, I still tango with that grief, and that fear, to be quite honest, and that those ties to home. But I've got a really beautiful life now that is authentically mine, and, I'm able to recover. I'm able to live authentically as me, even though my personality, my desire to think and lead and contribute in my own way, to be my kind of flamboyant self, was really squashed within my upbringing. So even for me, reclaiming self and getting to know myself has been a journey. So there's that. But also, rule number one of Cult Club is you're not a cult. Nobody ever thinks they're a cult. Like, don't call it a cult. Like, it takes a lot for that moment to click that, yeah, you're actually, problematic. And it's not a comfortable recognition when you do.
I wanted to end by thinking about the future a little bit. We've got this inquiry on at the moment. Assumedly, there's going to be some recommendations made at the end of it. What kind of changes can the government make?
This is a really interesting one because many cult inquiries or inquiries into groups like this have happened in different jurisdictions, and they've all been hamstrung on but freedom of religion and belief, freedom of association, and these are valid things. So we really need to change the framing here, and we need to start talking about coercive control in group settings. We're also suggesting to government, recommending to government that they have a independent commissioner for cults and high control groups. Reason being, just in Victoria alone, there's 30 different areas of law, 30 different acts, and there's something like 21 different government departments that may hold a single area of cultic abuse in their remit. So we're talking about how on earth do you coordinate this, when Peter doesn't know what Paul's doing? You need an independent commissioner to do that. You need it to be independent because if it's tied to a minister and you end up with a far-right minister at the head of that, it could be axed because it's a challenging concept for those far-right or even indeed really, really far-left groups. So we need it to be independent so it can coordinate things like research, education, public health style campaigns, support for survivors, exit strategies, and of course, civil and criminal recourse for victims. So that's what we want.
Claire, thank you so much for your time today.
My absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Elliot, for unpacking that one today.
Thanks,
A really interesting and important conversation. And of course, a huge thanks to Claire for sharing her story and joining us at the Daily Aus. The inquiry is continuing in Victoria. A full report and recommendations are due by September next year. We will keep you posted in the meantime. That's all we've got time for today. But if this episode has raised any issues for you, 24/7 crisis support is available through Lifeline on 13 11 14. For family and sexual violence support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732.